Hello and welcome to another standard video. Today I'm revisiting the Goblin archetype, which always revolves around Krenko mob boss tapping to make a whole bunch of 1/1 Goblin tokens, ideally with haste, and there's a few ways to grant our creatures haste in this deck, so we can immediately activate Krenko, otherwise it's often too slow in today's standard, and one of those of course is with the Howl Squad Heavy, giving other goblins we control haste, also spawns an attacking Goblin token each turn, and if we get to max speed can also tap to make a red for each goblin we control, which can also come in handy. And then the reason to splash blue is for Frostcliff Siege, an enchantment that will often choose the Teamer mode in this deck, giving our creatures one additional power, trample, and haste. So a siege with some goblins on the battlefield into Krenko mob boss can very quickly take over a game, so that's kind of our game plan. And then we also have the Draconautics Engineer, which can exhaust for a red mana to give other creatures haste until end of turn and put a +1 counter on it, so that could be another way to maybe activate Krenko the turn we play it, assuming we have at least 5 mana. Otherwise, the deck wants to get on the board quickly and go wide, using cards like the Seer Slicer Goblin, with Raid making a 1/1 Goblin token if we've attacked this turn, also pretty synergistic alongside the Howl Squad, since we're going to be forced to attack with a Goblin token anyways. Then at 1 mana, there's the Burnout Bastronaut, which is another way to get our engine started early, to get our speed to 4, so we can also maybe benefit from it with a Howl Squad Heavy, and once we get to max speed, this one also gains Double Strike, can also pay 2 mana to give it 1 additional power until end of turn. The Firebrand is also quite versatile, as it can maybe mow down opposing Llanowar Elves, dealing 1 damage, but also just a hasty Goblin that can increase our Goblin count for Krenko, and then has another bit of synergy that we'll see in just a second here. And then we also have the Grease Wrench Goblin, which is just a 2/1, so decent stats for a 1 mana Goblin. Can for 3 mana also exhaust to pick up a +1/+1 counter and then discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many, so it can also help cycle through the deck, maybe get rid of excess copies of certain legendary permanents that we no longer need, or get rid of lands if we're flooding out a bit. And then the Stadium Headliner is also quite synergistic with the Frostcliff Siege, as it can make a 1/1 warrior token when it attacks that goes away end of turn, but getting to pump both of those creatures up with our +1 power and trample is quite effective. And then this also doubles up as removal once we're going wide enough, can sacrifice the Headliner to deal damage to an opposing creature equal to the number of creatures we control, of course minus the Headliner, which will no longer be in play. And then we also have some cheap interaction. I'm splitting things up with Burst Lightning, and then since we're playing blue, may as well play a bounce spell as well with Into the Floodmaw, which is quite versatile, so even against control decks without creatures, it's not a dead card. And then we also have 2 copies of Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which gives us a bit of main deck graveyard hate, can maybe slow down some of the Kivero combo decks, although exiling 1 card per turn is not always good enough. But the real reason we're playing Cauldron, of course, is to inherit Krenko's ability to our other goblins. So once Krenko ends up in the graveyard, if it maybe got removed, or maybe we discarded it with a Grease Wrench, then now we can exile it with a Cauldron, put a +1 counter on one of our goblins, which can now also activate using Krenko's same ability. We have a few other activated abilities throughout that are pretty good with the Cauldron, like the Engineer can also make a 4/4 dragon token with flying. There's the Bastronaut, which can give a creature additional power, or even a Firebrand can tap and sacrifice to deal 1 damage to maybe deal the finishing blow. And then even Grease Wrench and Stadium Headliner all have activated abilities. So overall a pretty decent Cauldron deck, although we don't have a ton of discard outlets, so we're more hoping to naturally end up with a few goblins in the graveyard that we get to exile, as opposed to actively filling the graveyard ourselves. And then the mana base also has a few goodies, with Soulstone Sanctuary turning into a 3/3 creature with Vigilance that has all creature types, including Goblin. We also have 2 copies of Cavern of Souls, which can make our goblins uncounterable, so that can also help out against control. And then we have 13 blue sources between Multiversal Passage, Spire Bluff, River Power Verge, and Island. Once we get Steam Vents in Lorwyn, of course, we can add that to the list as well. And I'm sure we'll also get some other goblins to maybe spice up this strategy. But for now, let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the draw, and seems functional. 2 creatures that play well with the Siege as they help us go wide. Opponent black-green. So could see turn 2 Cub. Or Deep Cavern Bat. Likely to take either Burst Lightning or Seer Slicer. Goes for Burst Lightning. But yeah, now going for an attack, and Seer Slicer still lines up pretty well for me. Get to enable raid. They can trade if they want. I'll just get my Burst Lightning back. So yeah, could have been worse. Is their opponent kind of a mid-rangey Ouroboros deck? Black gives him access to a bit more interaction. And now a Scrap Shooter. Interesting that they didn't wait to maybe blow up the siege, so maybe they have another one in hand. Or they just needed a blocker ASAP. Well, I could play the siege, but it's not amazing here. So maybe we go Engineer plus Firebrand. Could technically finish off Scrap Shooter if I Burst Lightning and use Firebrand. It's a little drastic, but maybe that's still reasonable. Alternatively, if I just play my creatures next turn with a Siege, Burst Lightning can also trade for Scrap Shooter pretty cleanly. And it allows me to keep up Firebrand if another bat shows up as well. So yeah, I mean, I could attack and just get another token. Could have maybe bluff attacked before playing anything on the off chance that they take it. But yeah, this is what we wanted to avoid, Ouroboros getting to pump their team now. And did not have the means to deal 3 at instant speed. So now my best hope is just going wide by top decking Krenko. Although I guess with Burst Lightning and double Firebrand we can still clear the Ouroboros at least. So now do I make any attacks? I imagine if I send the 1/1, opponent just blocks with a Scrap Shooter. But yeah, that's still fine. Yep. So it's a 3-for-1 in the opponent's favor, so that never feels great. But Ouroboros is a type of card that can snowball very quickly. Alright, that's it. The Reach creature can also block our dragon, until we maybe give it 1 extra power and trample. And the bat's now gonna snipe my siege. Okay. Krenko was what we needed. Interestingly, I could still wait to get 1 more mana so I can give it haste with the Engineer, so I can immediately activate. And then for now make a dragon. I don't hate that. Mostly because our opponent still could have some spot removal in hand that they haven't had a chance to use. And Vivian can shoot down flyers. Still seems fine to activate Engineer. Finds Sentinel. Ooh, well, opponent may not have read Engineer all the way. Get to ambush the bat. Okay, so did not draw the land. Siege, Vivian could also destroy with a minus. But I kind of like Siege since it threatens to trade for a Scrap Shooter. And sets up Krenko. And then, let's see here, could also play the Headliner of course. Yeah, I guess that's okay. And then, want to see if I can finish off Vivian. Yeah, this seems okay to me. So they might just let Vivian go and eat my Headliner. But yeah, unless they play another bat, next turn we're looking at Krenko immediately activates. And that can potentially overpower an Ouroboros even. Sentinel's fine. Opponent does have 2 mana up, or 3 mana rather, thanks to Badger Mole. So they could still be representing some instant speed removal. But I only need 1 activation. And yeah, Ouroboros on top. And the Dread Knight's gonna draw into it, so Coast is clear for Krenko. Even have a Howl Squad. But yeah, it's gotta be time here for Krenko. And then can activate right away, since I'm not making any extra tokens. Unless, let's see, depends whether I want to attack. So right now I have 5 goblins. Would I have lethal if I activate Krenko? Opponent's got 3 blockers. One's decent on the dragon. 2, 3. So then 5 more goblins is 7 times 2 is 14. So it's not quite lethal. So question now is, do I make any attacks whatsoever? I don't think I do, actually. So then I may as well just activate Krenko now, in case my opponent wants to remove any of my creatures in response, which would leave me with fewer goblins. But I don't think an attack is worth it. If I get to untap with Krenko again, we can just set up a lethal attack. Another Badger Mole can still set up Ouroboros. So that last unknown has to be very good. Alright, opponent goes for Ouroboros. Plays Dread Knight, so yeah, they seem super dead now. Can play Howl Squad, make my token, and then activate Krenko. So I'll need to go full control for that to work out. Sentinel attacks. Can trade for the dragon, since that's not really contributing much. And even find another goblin, so Astronauts, Howl Squad, wait for the token, and then activate Krenko, and then attack. And I did not do the math, but pretty sure this is lethal. So yeah, small mistake from our opponent attacking with the Deep Cavern Bat. Although from the looks of it, they would not have drawn an answer to Krenko, so that still could have taken over. Because yeah, as you can see, even though our opponent's maybe gonna massively pump their team, where all their creatures are bigger than mine, as long as I can keep just doubling the number of goblins turn after turn, it doesn't really matter, I can still keep up, and eventually overwhelm them. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw with a fine hand. Facing black-white. So if it is a grindier matchup, we could get some good value out of the Cauldron. Maybe I do start with a headliner. And save the hasty Firebrand for later. Turn 2 Tome. So likely a Catramos kind of exile control deck. So then exiling stuff with Cauldron may not be all that beneficial, since it also enables the opponent's Catramos. But yeah, for now, Engineer attack seems fine. But Cauldron's also pretty synergistic with the Engineer if we can exile it. But our opponents got some of their own graveyard hates to potentially shut that down. So this turn, can expect them to either draw or remove one of my creatures. Frostcliff Siege for haste is kind of nice here, since it also sets up a hasty Bastronaut. So I think that's going to be my play, as opposed to going for the Jeskai mode, which would also be decent here, getting to draw extra cards in a grindy matchup. But haste is pretty good against control as well. And then the mobilized tokens hit extra hard as well. This way I don't need to overextend with more creatures. And yeah, we're getting some good damage in. Our opponent's gonna cease just to gain 2 draw card. So yeah, they've got plenty of graveyard hate. I'm sure the opponent's got a great matchup against all the Kavero Reanimator decks. And they have Judgment to wipe the board, as we suspected. Okay, so now Bastronaut into Firebrand. Question is if I attempt Cauldron as well or not. I guess it's better than trying to pump the Bastronaut for now. And we'll see if our opponent reacts with Soul Guide Lantern. Let me start by attacking. So now I have to kind of decide if we want them to pop the Soul Guide Lantern or if I activate Cauldron. Yeah, I guess I will try this now. If they have to sack Lantern, they don't get to draw any cards. They're still taking 4. And now we still have 2 other creatures with activated abilities that can maybe benefit from a Cauldron. Sanctuary as a creature lane to keep up the pressure. Opponent's looking at the graveyard for a deadly cover-up to wipe the board once again. Alright. So, would like to top deck more creatures here. Opponent got rid of all the Bastronauts. And find a Grease Wrench. So, yeah, I guess we'll go for Grease Wrench, Exhaust. And get an extra counter from Firebrand. So we're hitting for 5, we have a lethal threat on the board. And Sanctuary also represents another threat. Burst Lightning can maybe burn them out. Although they're potentially going to gain some life off Maze Mind Tome as well. Their opponent back up to 8. At least by forcing them to scry, they haven't actually drawn a ton of extra cards with it. And now Elspeth cannot destroy the Grease Wrench, so can just make a pair of 1/1s. Another Cauldron the draw. So, yeah, kind of an awkward draw here, all things considered. A land would have been better. So now Grease Wrench could go face. And then we can maybe finish them off with Burst Lightning, or I can go after Elspeth, and if they don't double block, I get to finish her off with a Burst Lightning instead. I think I just go face. Even though they have shown us some life gain with Cease and Desist as well. Opponent's gonna double chump. That's fine. And then the plan is animate Sanctuary end of turn. And then, who knows, maybe we'll use the Burst Lightning. Could also look into using Cauldron on their stuff to prevent another cover-up. Sure. Alright, opponent with Desist, destroying all artifacts and enchantments. That's fine. Does mean we lose the Trample. Then it's going to be a little bit harder to cross the finish line now. Engineer can exhaust, and then other creatures gain haste, not itself. Yeah, Elspeth at 7 loyalty in the meantime, so if I attack they can just double chump. Yeah, this might be getting out of hand a little bit. Currently no creatures in graveyard for Cauldron either. Opponent is gonna double chump, so that'll keep them alive. But now I might be forced to overextend into another board wipe that they could have. Also Fountain Port, making 2 tokens is pretty relevant now with Elspeth, since we no longer have the trample. But yeah, I guess I'll go all out here. Stab the engineer. So now Cauldron can grant the engineer's ability to my other creatures as well. And a Firebrand. Opponent can still activate Fountain Port. That's 3 mana to make a pair of fish tokens. So they do still have 2 blockers, even though it's going to cost them 1 life, which then maybe sets them in range of a Burst Lightning. But yeah, going Firebrand. Can also sack it and then exile it with Cauldron, so my other creatures can also ping the opponent. So I've got a few interesting lines available. And I think I go Firebrand, ping a token, they could sack it to Fountain Port to draw, that's also fine. So now they can't actually make any tokens anymore with Fountain Port. So then now technically if they didn't draw anything, Burst Lightning the token and attack for lethal. And that works. Go to attackers. Oh, it actually drew the Get Lost. Okay, but now I can go Cauldron my Firebrand, counter on Sanctuary, hit for 4, it has Vigilance, so then I can still tap and sack it using the Firebrand's ability to finish them off. Wow, super close game here. But yeah, Cauldron's got some pretty interesting tricks up its sleeve when the games drag out. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We have what looks like a keepable hand. We'll still need a mountain to make blue with the river power, but for now it still taps for red. And yeah, maybe start with a headliner over Firebrand. Opponent with Liner Elves. And especially now that we drew another Firebrand, I just want to clear the elves. And we can still attack for 2. So our opponent on a green ramp deck. Maybe more of a stompy deck with a curator. Alright, so this turn, got a couple options. Could Burst Lightning and use Firebrand to finish off Curator. That doesn't seem amazing. I could go for an attack just to enable Raid and then finish off Curator with a Burst Lightning. Or I can just go for Howl Squad, send the 1/1 into the Curator, and that's it. Kind of a close call. I don't necessarily want to lose the Headliner, since it can represent another removal spell. But starting to go wide is decent. So you know what, so let's just send anyway. If I were to sack Headliner, it's only 2 damage. Possible our opponent suspects foul play and doesn't block, which is what they actually did. Alright, in that case I'll just go Seer Slicer, keep a burst. Make an extra 1/1. And then now Headliner could potentially deal more damage going forward. Another Liner Elves. Yeah, the main threat we would need to deal with is an Ouroboros, which we can maybe still hope to remove with a Headliner. But wants to Growth Elves, so we'll take that out. And another Firebrand. So, yeah, tough choice here. Could remove the Curator and just start beating down, which is not a bad plan. Because even if they do play Ouroboros, while it's going to be big, we can maybe still go around it. So then I don't mind just going for Firebrands, attack, remove Curator. After we mobilize. And then their most powerful play here with 4 mana would be Ouroboros. Get a counter, double its power essentially. But we're starting to go wide enough where we can still beat it. It's just going to be a paw patch. With an extra counter. Ooh, Krenko, so now we're just a land away from completely decimating them. So play Howl Squad. And I'll send in, at the very least, all the 1/1s. Yeah, that seems good enough. Can also use Firebrand to clear a path. So damage happens. So if I use Firebrand on the recruit, they both trigger. They would get 2 counters on this recruit. So either way you slice it, I cannot cleanly take care of both creatures since the triggers would resolve before the damage. So I don't think I bother using Firebrand since we just want more bodies for Krenko. Bailoth is fine. You would have a fight spell for Howl Squad. Things might get ugly, but we'll see. Opponent's not really in a position to attack. So yeah, any untapped land here will do. And Bastronaut instead. So can play it. How does an all-out attack look like? Since we can pump this up as well. This has Menace, so this would by itself hit for 2. Opponent's got 3 blockers. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 going through, so we should have Xaxes. And I guess we even get an extra 1/1 token. So yeah, just double checking. Block Heavy, block Seer Slicer, block a token, and then we should have enough. Alright, sorry Krenko, you were a turn late. But yeah, in these types of matchups where the opponent isn't flush with removal, if we can be on the front foot and yeah, keep something like a Howl Squad alive, it certainly threatens to get out of hand with a Krenko, which can very quickly take over. Even if the opponent's going very tall, as long as they don't trample, we can just keep chumping their creatures forever. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. This hand's a little awkward. No blue mana to cast the siege, and only 1 goblin to go with it. Cauldron's not doing much with a Seer Slicer, so I'll take a mulligan. This is much better. Wish I could keep everything, since this is a very nice curve-out hand. Have to get rid of 1. Land feels greedy. If I get rid of Bastronaut, I don't have my raid enabler for Seer Slicer. Although the really important card there is Siege into Krenko, so we want to preserve that with as many goblins as possible. So I think it's between one of the earlier goblins. I am on the play, so there's a chance I can enable Seer Slicer even without a Bastronaut. But it could go either way. And this also lets me play a tap line on 1. So we'll see if Seer Slicer survives. Because Krenko by itself, even with haste, is a pretty slow way to go about it. I see opponent maybe on a Dinosaur Reanimator deck. And yeah, they have Ghalta in Graveyard, so they could just win the game next turn for all we know. I drew Howl Squad, which is fine. Probably better than Frostcliff. So we'll see if our opponent's got best hand here with Swamp Vision. We could be in trouble. And yep, they're already hovering over the graveyard, so turn 3 Swamp Vision, put in Ghalta. That's the dream start for the Dino deck. And double Voltborn is quite the payoff. At least it doesn't kill me on the spot. So it actually could have been worse, believe it or not. They just have a lot of cards, they discard another Galta to set it up again. But I've got a hasty Krenko, so that can do some things. I can certainly attack with a token since we get another one end of turn. So then it doesn't really matter if I activate Krenko now or end of turn. Since I wasn't going to attack with a 1/1s. Opponent does have removal in the deck, so I guess I will activate Krenko before passing it back. Because I could Bitter Triumph one of my Goblins, probably Krenko. So this way I get more 1/1s. Next turn with a Siege, we are threatening a lot of damage. But we'll see if our opponent can combo off again with a second Galta. Either way, they could gain a lot of life with double Voltborn in play. If they have another Swamp Vision or a Zombify. Yep. So back-to-back Galtas. And this time they've had a lot of extra cards to draw into. And they can give their creatures haste as well. Third Voltborn. Their opponent's gotta be careful that they don't end up decking here somehow. But yeah, these all trample, so I'm pretty sure I'm dead here. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the nut draw for the dinosaur deck. Doesn't get a whole lot better. And even another Hatcher and Gishoth of the extra Galta trigger, since they put another one in play in the meantime. So their opponent's drawn half of their deck. And gets to make some hasty 3/3s. Yeah. Hats off, can't do much about this. Can try to line up some blocks, but yeah, even if I count all my toughness here, 10, 13, yeah, we're super dead. GG's. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. This hand is missing a few elements, mostly lands, but I think it's still functional. Opponent blue-black. Now I guess I'll start with a Bastronaut, has an easier time enabling the a raid than maybe a Grease Wrench. Opponent with a Quantum Riddler, so they might be flickering it to keep it in play with Splash Portal if they have another one. For now, attack, play Seer Slicer. And get our speed up as well. Do need a second red source, but outside of one Sanctuary, all my lands can produce red for Krenko. The Heist. We'll see what I'm working with. Takes my Firebrand. Since that can also take out the Seer Slicer now. Alright, that's too bad. At least we drew a red source, so I can double spell another Bastronaut and Engineer would make sense. And then next turn we're threatening max speed as well. Opponent with a Reality Fulcrum, alright, so we're going deep. Finds Stock Up and the Terminus. So they get to ramp. So if they're going for Fulcrum, Terminus, kind of feels like they might have a board wipe and I don't want to just run out Krenko here. Plus next turn I could give stuff haste, which would make it a bit more impactful. So this turn I could potentially look into pumping the Bastronauts. Or I could make a 4/4 Dragon, which is maybe better. Although still weak in the face of a Sweeper, of course, so then I would rather get my extra damage in. Could also pass and then maybe end of turn animate Sanctuary. So I've got a few options available, but I guess I'll stick with Dragon option, which we can also activate at instant speed. Alright, stock up. They will still have 5 mana for a cover-up, if that's what they have. Alright, never mind. Opponent's gonna steal more of our cards. Yeah, that's just a 2-3. So we should have a pretty good turn lined up. Make a dragon. Untap, Burst Lightning represents 4 damage. So if I just attack all out, I'm guessing my opponent's dead, even though I could set up Krenko with haste. And then with 4 goblins, I get to make 4 1/1s. The only issue being the goblin tokens from Krenko would not have haste, since this is kind of a one-shot activation. So it's not quite as impactful as activating Krenko with the Frostcliff Siege or the Howl Squad Heavy on the battlefield. Alright, sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a nice hand. Can hopefully curve Howl Squadding to Krenko to give it haste. No 1-drop to enable raid, so won't have quite as many tokens on the battlefield. Facing a red deck. So Seer Slicer versus Engineer. I think I still like Seer Slicer, because then the 1/1 token from Howl Squad next turn can enable raid. Even if our opponent has good blocks lined up. Alright, Needlehead will get in the way, although now Frostcliff Siege as well. Yeah, still gonna go for Howl Squad here. And get some more goblins in play. Didn't think that I wanted to trade here, but it was an option, because then if they trade I get to keep more 1/1s. So we'll see if they can remove the Howl Squad. It's gonna be May, punishing non-creature spells. I will cast one of them. But yeah, I think going Siege before Krenko is reasonable. Although Krenko would immediately get a chance to activate without any interference. So that seems worthwhile. So I'm gonna go full control here, so we find the best window to activate Krenko, which is right about now. And then we may as well send in all of the 1/1s, since they're gonna get to eat 2 of them regardless. And then if we still have Krenko next turn with the Siege, we should certainly have lethal. Unstoppable Slasher is acceptable. Take my draw. And yeah, opponent knows that they're dead. I can just activate and go wide. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. This hand looks functional, especially if I can make a first token with a Seer Slicer, with a Siege. We can maybe start going wide. Opponent on kind of the mono-white aura deck. So, removal is going to be important. I want to time it so we can punish one of their enchantments, ideally. But of course, I'm also going to have to tap out for my creatures and enchantments. So I don't know if I can afford to keep up 1 mana the entire time. But I could try. Because the way we lose this game is an early Sheltered by Ghost that goes unopposed, and then our opponent keeps stacking more auras onto the same creature. Opponent doing nothing here. So, yeah, let's slow play it and see how that plays out. Opponent had a Feather of Flight. Not quite as backbreaking as killing their creature in response to Sheltered by Ghosts, but still seems like the play. So our opponent might think we're on a control deck here, which is why they're main phasing stuff. Floodmaw is actually pretty huge, so that gives me more interaction. So now I can Seer Slicer, keep up Floodmaw. Still gonna wait, even though they could go Shelter by Ghost with a Hexproof trick in response to my bounce spell. Vendor I'm gonna let slide. Also starting to regret passage on red instead of blue. So I'm gonna wait and see what we draw. Opponent does have the Seam Rip, as it turns out. So that clears the Sear Slicer. Counter on Vendor. Just gonna take my turn, draw Burst Lightning. So then I can go Sear Slicer, keep up Floodmaw and Burst. I'm kind of just losing on the board, so I do need to make something happen. But I'm hoping to get another aura out of them. And they could also activate the Air Temple. So then I would probably have to make a move. Ethereal Armor, perfect. So now I can bounce the Vendor. I guess our opponent would still be able to replay it and make another Sorcerer roll. But as long as there are creatures within range of Burst Lightning, that's fine by me. Yeah, I don't think I want to wait for them to attack and get more +1 counter triggers. So that's back. I guess if they also put the +1 counter on Scavenger, I can no longer Burst Lightning it, but it would make sense for them to target the Vendor because of the Goblin not being able to attack past it. So I think we let that slide. And then Burst Lightning deals with Scavenger. And then hopefully we can still beat the Vendor. Opponent did keep on top. Yeah, just gotta do this. Main phase. Pass a turn. And we still have some catching up to do. Opponent keeps on top again. And a Weaver. So that's an extra blocker. Think I'm still down to go Siege, Bastronaut, attack. And then I would get a 1/1 token out of it from Raid. I assume they're not going to trade away their creatures since they can pump it up with Air Temple next turn. But Haste still seems like the move here. And then I guess I'll play my land out, even though I could maybe discard it to the Grease Wrench at some point. So I may as well pump. And get a token. Opponent gets another counter. And what did they keep on top? Probably an aura. And yeah, another Feather of Flight will do it. Yeah, this one's tough. We just needed to get something going that's a little bit more powerful with Krenko to go over the top. We actually drew a decent amount of interaction, but the virtue of the Aura deck just makes it awkward to time it correctly if you want to get to 2-for-1s. And yeah, wasn't quite good enough. Okay, we're on the draw with a fine hand. Just need to hit a couple more land drops to get up to Krenko. But in the meantime, Bastronaut, a great way to set up the raid on Sear Slicer. Opponent with Starting Town, no 1-drop. Is this a Graveyard deck, perhaps? Yep, it's a Kivero Reanimator deck. And they milled Kivero, found a land. Okay, for now, still gonna attack, play Sear Slicer. And then Engineer could be a way to set up Krenko with haste. Awaken takes out Sear Slicer. Well, they actually go for Bastronaut, so now Burst Lightning can clear Town Greeter to let me keep attacking. But yeah, the question remains, can our opponents mill Bringer of the Last Gift? And if so, do they have Kivero in hand? Right now their graveyard's not super threatening, but that can very quickly change. Another Awaken goes for Engineer. They're debating. Alright, Engineer down. So then I may as well just play Krenko here. And hope for the best. They do get to mill 3 more cards, so if they mill the right ones, we could be dead. And they can also return Kivero back to hand if they didn't have one already. So we're getting back the Spider. And they did not mill any super scary creatures at least. Fate Weaver a way to access Kivero, as it can tutor up a Spider. Now, without haste, the tokens from Krenko aren't immediately gonna win me the game. And our opponent with the Overlord. Alright, they milled a lot of lands. They get to connive here. Maybe they've got something big in hand that they want to discard. A River Regent. Okay. Firebrand's not bad, so I can start by just dumping all my goblins into play, activating Krenko. I imagine that's still going to be better than just attacking with it, even though between Firebrand and Headliner I can clear both of the opponent's blockers, and then 5, 6, 7, I guess we just have lethal, so that works too. So yeah, 4 mana, 3/3. Hill Giants are playable in Standard. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a hand that just needs to draw 2 more lands, and then we're golden. I'll start with a Headliner. Can maybe attack for 2. Headliner also quite good with a Siege, as we get to pump 2 creatures up. And the Llanowar Elves we can Firebrand. So far, so good. Yeah, Firebrand cannot be underestimated in this deck. Giving us an extra Goblin, a way to deal with an Elf, a way to maybe increase our speed by targeting the opponent. Can do it all. And then it's also potentially an ability for Cauldron to give to our other creatures. Alright, still gonna go for Siege, since it has by far the highest upside. And then if they want to trade the Elves, that's fine by me. Opponent takes it. So we might even get there without Krenko, but still hoping for an untapped land next turn. Opponent could cast Ouroboros. I'm going down to 8 for access to 4 mana. And it's just going to be a Badger Mole, which still gives him access to 4 mana, so we could still see a 4-drop. Oh, they actually have a removal spell. That was a little unexpected, but at least it didn't take out Krenko, although we still couldn't draw a land. So, now what? I guess Headliner attacks and can take out the Badger Mole. Firebrand could also attack, now that our opponent's at 8. It's more damage than just pinging the Llanowar Elves if they do trade. I guess we can see how they block first. And then I can reevaluate. Alright, so I can let damage happen. And then... still gonna use Headliner on Cubs, since that's kind of scary. Okay. So we're down to 1 Goblin, but our opponent's at 2. And that 1 Goblin's a Firebrand. For now, another Elves. And a Summon Fenrir. This must be a random encounter deck. Explains the Stormbrood. Finally, time for Krenko. So do I just have lethal if I attack here? Opponent's got 3 toughness. I mean, I guess activating is still fine. Same amount of trample damage. And this should just be game. Alright, so still managed to cast Krenko eventually, but wasn't quite as impactful as it could have been. Alright, so we got to see this red Goblin deck splashing blue for Frostcliff Siege, which I think is a worthy candidate to splash in this archetype, as it's a bit more reliable to give your creatures haste as opposed to maybe getting to max speed for the Raceway, I believe it's called. The Engineer, of course, also requires an extra mana, and the House Squad Heavy is already kind of a big target for opposing removal spells, so that one's not always likely to stick around. So then the Siege gives you another option that's maybe a little bit more difficult for the opponent to interact with, and pumping up the creatures, especially when you're going wide with a Seer Slicer or with your mobilized creatures, can still represent a lot of extra damage. So overall, this seems like a playable deck in the current best of 1 meta, but definitely not the most powerful thing you can be doing. But who knows, maybe Lorwyn will introduce a few more goblins, and then we can revisit the archetype. But for now, I want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.